Hello and welcome to the podcast engineer. Oh my God, I can't say the name of my own show. The Podcast Engineering Show. My name is Chris Curran. I produce podcasts and I also teach at Podcast Engineering School. On this show, we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. I often interview guests and I also do other episodes where I present some tips and tricks. Those are my daily goodie episodes, and you can receive those daily goodies via email. Just sign up on the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. Today, I'm going to discuss some mistakes I've made producing podcasts. Yeah, I kind of racked my brain to think over the last 10, 11 years of producing podcasts, and I came up with a bunch of mistakes I made, so I just wanted to talk about that. In this episode, guess what microphone I'm using? What's that? You're right. The Electro-Voice RE320 microphone. Yeah, so I'm using the RE320 and I have it plugged into my channel strip, which is a Neve Portico II. I'm using some compression, some EQ, and a bit of saturation. And the reason I'm using this mic in this episode of this show is because I started making daily YouTube videos. Yeah, just little, very short videos on some of the topics that I cover in the daily goodies. So I'm going to be making daily videos for at least the next 3 months because I made a goal. I made a goal for 90 days. I'm going to produce one short video every day, every weekday, and put it up on YouTube and also on Odyssey and Rumble and BitChute. Yeah, just search for Podcast Engineering School and you'll find the channel. So anyway, in those videos, I'm using the exact setup I'm using right now. So I'm actually not going to do any post-production on my voice in this recording, except to bring it up to the proper loudness level. So I'm not going to do any more EQ or compression or anything. So I'd really love to know your feedback. How do you think my voice sounds right now? And again, it's the same sound that I'm using in the video. So anyway, if you have thoughts, you want to share your thoughts, please do. So I'm going to get to the mistakes I've made in a second, but I want to mention this funny thing that happened. My wife and I were hiking on one weekend, and I was wearing my shirt that I got at Podfest, and the shirt says, "Ask me about my podcast." And this shirt is ingenious because whenever I wear it, most times, I'd say 75% of the time that I wear that shirt, people actually do ask me about my podcast. They're like, "Hey, what's your podcast?" So anyway, hiking with my wife, walking down the trail, and a guy and his wife coming the other way, and he must have seen my shirt, and he said, "Hey, what's your podcast?" And then immediately he added, "Just kidding." And we all kind of laughed. And I was waiting for him to say, "No, seriously, what's your podcast?" But he didn't, because he didn't care about my podcast. He didn't ask again, and we just kind of laughed, and they kept walking. And but it was just weird. It was weird that he said, "What's your podcast?" "Just kidding," and like he really didn't care. And again, it's not weird. To me, it was a little weird because if I was in his position, I wouldn't have done that, right? I might have made the joke, but then I would have said, like, "No, seriously, what's your podcast?" But it was just funny to my wife and I that he just didn't care at all. Yeah, so anyway, I thought that was an interesting story. Maybe you've had a similar story wearing that shirt. By the way, if you're new here, I do want to remind you, I've done many interviews with amazing podcast producers, editors, industry folks and stuff. I haven't really done any interviews in about the last 9 months, but for at least 5 years before that, I interviewed. There's so many great episodes of me interviewing people about their equipment, their workflow, their setup, everything about technically producing podcasts. So again, if you're new here, go back and listen to some of those interviews. Some of them are amazing. So, all right, well, let's get to it. This is not going to be a long episode. And not because I haven't made many mistakes because I have, right? We all make mistakes. Even though I've been, an audio engineer for 30 years now. Actually, yeah, this is the year that it's 30 years. I went to school in 1992. All right, so mistakes I've made producing podcasts. Number one, drum roll, please. Okay. I published one of my clients' episodes with 30 seconds of silence at the beginning. And probably about an hour or two after it published, my client alerted me and said, "Hey, I'm getting messages from people. There's something wrong with this episode's audio." And I went and checked it real quick. And of course, I saw immediately that there was 30 seconds of silence at the beginning. So very quickly, and I had to act quickly. I'll tell you why in a second. Very quickly, I chopped off that 30 seconds of silence at the beginning, and I resaved it and re-tagged it, and I uploaded it to the media host. We were using Libsyn, and I replaced the file in Libsyn, right? Okay. And okay, that's fine. So after I replaced the file, anyone who downloaded that episode, they would get the correct audio, right? But anyone who had already downloaded it in the first 2 hours that it was released, they downloaded the bad audio with the 30 seconds of silence. And I actually don't know if they deleted that episode and then downloaded it again. I'm sure they would get the correct version. But again, all the people who had already downloaded it, unfortunately, they had the bad version, and there's really nothing you can do about that. You can't really reach out to all your podcast subscribers and say, "Hey, I updated the audio. Just delete this one and download it again." There's no way to do that, right? Technically speaking. So anyway, that was weird. I felt bad. It wasn't the end of the world, obviously, but as a podcast producer, I pride myself in taking my time, doing things right. And even if it takes longer, and it always takes longer, but I really try to do a great job on every episode. So when that happened, I was a little upset with myself, but I wasn't too upset with myself because, how many thousands of episodes have I produced? And yeah, anyway. Okay, let's move on. Number 2, during an online recording session, after a participant dropped off and then returned, I forgot to press record again in Squadcast. Of course, I was recording a local backup, but let me explain what happened. So the participant, the internet guest, dropped off and then came back. And Squadcast used to have this feature or bug, it's really a bug, where if anybody dropped off the session, Squadcast would stop recording everyone. It would stop recording anything. It would just stop recording. Like, people can still talk, but nothing's being recorded. And so I didn't know that's how the platform worked at the time. I figured, like a sort of a sensible human being, that, okay, if you have a podcast with 4 people and three of them are talking and then the 4th guy drops off, like, why would you stop recording? So anyway, just a quick side note. In the end, I did end up talking with the guys from Squadcast, and they did change that. Obviously, because that was pretty ridiculous. That's like something that sounds good on paper, but in the real world, no, you can't do that. So anyway, so what happened in the scenario was the person dropped off, and then they came back. And as the producer, I was like, okay, he's back, everything's fine. I didn't realize that the recording had stopped, so I didn't press record again. So in Squadcast, for the rest of the episode, Squadcast didn't record anything further. Now, of course, as you know, if you're a regular listener, I record backups. I usually try to record 2 backups. So I was recording a local backup, and I ended up using that local backup, even though it was definitely a pain in the butt, because on my local backup, all the participants' voices were mixed together in one recording. So that makes it harder to to produce later, right? To mix later and to make sure everyone's voice is the same volume and stuff like that. That's much harder to do when the recording has everyone's voice already mixed together in it, right? So anyway, Squadcast fixed that issue. And then of course, from my end, I just, after that kind of freaked me out actually. So after that, like if anyone dropped off, I would immediately, jump and make sure it was still recording or whatever. Or if it wasn't recording, I would stop the people from talking and say, okay, hold on, the recording stopped. But like I said, Squadcast fixed it, so it doesn't happen anymore. But anyway, that was weird. Okay, let's move on. Number 3. On an in-person recording session, I forgot to hit record and realized it about 5 minutes into the recording. So this happened in my podcast studio in New Jersey around 2012 or 2013. And I used to have a physical studio. People would come in, sit down, and we would record. And I was doing this show that I did with a friend at the time called Social Media Unscrambled. That's the show where Barry made his debut, the Barry's voice. But anyway, we did a interview. Someone came by my studio to do an episode, and as the engineer, I'm like, okay, we're ready to go. I was also the host of the show, by the way. So I was like, okay, let's go. And I played the intro music and I did the intro and we started talking. And literally after about 5 minutes, I looked down and I saw that my recorder, because I was only recording to I was recording in the computer, but I forgot to hit record in the computer. And this is before I did several backups. So for that first 5 minutes, nothing was recorded. So as people at around the 5 minute mark, when I realized that I wasn't recording, I had to sheepishly sort of stop everyone and say, all right, hold on, wait, we got to start over. And everyone's like, why? That was great. It was going good. And I said, oh, I'm an idiot. I forgot to press record. And they're like, oh, and it's okay. It's a mistake. And it was only 5 minutes, but the funniest part of the whole story, though, is that we had to start over again, obviously. And so when we started over, we were trying to sort of feign some authentic enthusiasm. And it wasn't really inauthentic, but anyway, it was just, and then we ended up joking as we were talking, that I had forgot to hit record and all that. But anyway, so I'm glad it wasn't a major issue, but man, at that moment when you look down and it's not recording, oh man, your stomach just drops and you're like, oh my God. So, but it happens. I mean, rarely happens, but again, we're all human. We all make these mistakes, right? All right, number 4, and there's only 5 on the list, but this is number 4. Oh yeah, I mixed. This has happened several times. I'll mix an episode on my monitors, my monitor speakers, while I'm mistakenly using the calibration profile for my headphones. So for my near field monitors and for my headphones, for both individually, I use SonarWorks. It's like calibration software for your headphones and for your speakers. And what you do is you calibrate your headphones and then you calibrate your speakers to play back at a flat frequency response. Just so nothing is accentuated unnaturally and you can hear what you're hearing. As an engineer, you have to really be able to trust your monitors, and this is a great way to make sure that your headphones and your monitors, they both play back at a flat frequency response. So, but the calibration for the headphones is completely different than the calibration for the monitor speakers. So when I'm listening to my monitor speakers and then I want to switch to my headphones, I have to change that calibration profile from speakers to headphones. And then I can listen on my headphones and sounds good. And then when I want to move back to my speakers, I have to do the opposite. I have to change the calibration profile back to the speakers. Well, sometimes this has happened a few times, probably 2 or 3 times. I'll switch monitoring, but I'll forget to switch the calibration profile. So then what happens is let's say I'll be listening on my speakers, but it's playing through my headphone calibration profile. So it ends up sounding funny. Not too funny, but it ends up sounding, it's not accurate. Let's put it that way. And sometimes I've done that I'll listen for like an hour. I'll produce an episode and then afterwards I'll be like, oh my God, I was on the wrong calibration profile. And then of course, I have to check my mix because it's like, all right, I mixed this with the wrong calibration profile. So now let me listen with the correct calibration profile and make sure that this episode still sounds good. And it always does, because the difference is not that great between these calibration profiles, but it is significant. And again, it's not correct. So anyway, that's happened a few times, and that's annoying because it's like, that's such a simple thing that, and again, I've only, out of how many, episodes and pieces of audio have I mixed that I'd never make this mistake, but I've done it 2-3 times and it's a little bit annoying, but again, not the end of the world. Okay, number 5. Well, number 5 is sort of like a catch-all because there have been untold number of inaccuracies when I'm using processors like EQ, compression, or denoise, or de-plosive. Sometimes I'll use one of these processors too aggressively, right? Like, let's say it's a denoise. I'll take out too much noise and then I'll sort of damage the sound of the voice a little bit. And, I'll listen to it later, even like a week later after the episode is up. Sometimes I'll hear it and I'll be like, oh, I used a little too much denoise. And okay, of course, I'm evaluating it with the ears of an audio engineer. The general public, it's probably not a big deal. Like, it's definitely not a big deal because I'm sort of splitting hairs over here, right? Even though I think in this particular example, if I think I used a little too much denoise, again, it's not that the audio is bad. It's just that in my mind, I didn't do it perfectly, right? And sometimes it might be borderline bad. I wouldn't say borderline bad. I don't think I really put out any audio that's bad or even near bad sounding. But again, I just hold a very high bar for myself. And when I don't hit it, I notice it, right? Like any professional or any, sort of perfectionist, right? Sometimes with compression, I'll not use enough compression. That's usually my mistake with compression. And there are other, EQ. Sometimes I'll hear something later and I'll want to adjust the EQ again, but of course it's too late. But again, these aren't major mistakes, but these are small mistakes. I would consider them small mistakes. So, all right. And I'm sure there's how many other mistakes I've made that I just couldn't think of, right? I tried to think of any major mistakes. Like, I couldn't think of anything major. So anyway, that's my list. FYI, Podcast Engineering School, the next semester starts January 10th, 2023. Yeah, 2023, man. Well, that's it. So I appreciate you listening. I appreciate if you want to check out my daily videos now. It's on the YouTube channel for Podcast Engineering School, but you can also find it on Rumble and Odyssey. I like pretty much any other platform other than YouTube better than YouTube. So if you do use Rumble or Odyssey, I suggest watching my videos there. Go subscribe and stuff like that. But YouTube's fine too. It's just that, All right, well, that's it. And of course, again, let me know how my voice sounds right now because I'm using this setup with the RE20 that I use on my videos, and I really want to know if this sounds good. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, that I love the way this sounds. Like, I'm very happy with how this sounds. So let me know what you think. Do you like the way my voice sounds? Does it sound better than it normally does or not? Anyway, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye.